You can be married to a good man and still feel completely alone. And one of the most confusing parts is that on the surface, everything can look fine. You don't fight that much, you're kind to each other, you're polite, you co parent well. But underneath it all, something still feels off. You feel disconnected and maybe even invisible. And the thing is, this doesn't happen randomly. It happens through what I call the everything is fine system. And the thing is that the harder you try to keep the peace within that system, the more distance it creates. A few years ago in my own marriage, I had a moment where I realized that I was in this exact pattern. We had just put the kids to bed and the house was finally quiet. We were only sitting about a foot apart, but I felt lonely. And I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. I just felt like there wasn't anything of depth or of substance to say or share. We weren't angry, there was no big crisis. I just felt lonely. And if you had asked either of us how our marriage was going, I think we probably both would have said, fine. And that's what made it so confusing. Because emotionally distant marriages don't simply break, they drift slowly and quietly in this everything is fine pattern. Where on the surface, everything looks good. You talk about the kids and what's for dinner and what your schedule looks like for the week. But when something real comes up, like a hurt feeling or a moment of feeling alone or a desire for more, that feeling and that thought gets swallowed. Maybe you've tried bringing it up before and it didn't help, or maybe even it seemed to make things worse. And so you learn to adapt. And instead, you stay pleasant and you keep the peace. And because nothing bad seems to happen when you stay surface level, your relationship actually trains you to stay there. Pleasant and polite feels safe, while depth and vulnerability feels risky. So over time, you fall into this cycle of avoidance, crisis, reconnection, and then it starts over again. Avoidance, crisis, reconnection, where everything is fine until it's not. The feelings build and build until they spill over. Tension builds until something cracks and leads to a challenging, painful conversation or a tearful night or things and resentments that were previously unsaid spilling out. Things feel really raw for a few days, and maybe you momentarily feel closer, but then everything goes back to just fine once again, and the cycle restarts. And the longer you live in that cycle, the easier it is to slowly disappear within your own marriage without either of you even realizing what's happening. And here's where most advice gets it wrong. People usually assume that emotional distance means there's something wrong and unfixable within the marriage, or that your husband has stopped caring. But emotional distance is often not about love, it's about skill and emotional safety. But here's the part that changes everything. When a husband withdraws, often wives will respond to that by trying to close the gap, by trying to fix the problem. However, when that doesn't work, we often adapt. We grow quieter, we stop saying things, and we become emotionally distant ourselves. And slowly, we become the wife who doesn't need much, and that's where the problem begins. Because if you show up that way long enough, he doesn't just stop responding to your emotions, he stops seeing them altogether. And over time, that distance doesn't stay the same, it grows. Not because either of you have stopped caring, but because neither of you know how to break the pattern. So let's talk about what actually works here, because it's not going to be one big sit down conversation where everything gets said all at once. That usually is overwhelming and backfires, anyways. What I'm going to talk about and share that actually works is a lot simpler and much more powerful. Shift number one is micro expressions. These are tiny, real sentences that let your husband in on your inner world. So, for example, if he asks, "What's wrong?" instead of saying, "Nothing, everything's fine," you might say, "Actually, I've been really missing you lately." Or if your feelings get hurt, instead of getting defensive or shutting down and becoming silent, you say, "Ouch." And that's all that's needed. No big speech, no confrontation, just pure, simple, honest vulnerability. Shift number two is the 10% rule. Your marriage doesn't need to and probably won't become totally emotionally open overnight. You just need to express about 10% more vulnerability than you normally would and grow from there. Because in a marriage that's been living on the surface for a long time, one honest, vulnerable truth is enough to really start changing the dynamic. Shift number three is how you say it, because true, pure vulnerability is both honest and respectful. And this is where structure matters. So instead of blame or criticism, you would say, for example, I miss you. I've missed feeling close to you lately. Or, ouch, if your feelings got hurt. No accusation, no list of everything that he's done wrong, just a clear window into your experience. And here's why this works. When a person feels criticized, they usually shut down or try to defend themselves. It's just human nature. But if your husband hears vulnerable longing, he's much more likely to lean in because you're not presenting a case against him, you're inviting him into connection. Now, the first few times you try this, it might feel really awkward or even uncomfortable. He might not respond the way that you think or hope that he will, and you might feel awkward and clunky. That's okay, and it doesn't mean it's not working. It means you're both learning a new language, the language of emotional intimacy. And the more you practice it, the more comfortable it will become and the better at it you'll get. More real moments, less quiet resentment, and more connection. I remember the first time I said to my husband, I miss you, instead of the usual, you never spend time with me. And I was scared. I was afraid that I was going to put my true feelings out there and be left hanging and then feel rejected. Instead, he looked at me with recognition and said, me too. And that moment changed everything for us. And it didn't happen with a big, painful conversation. It just happened with one honest, real, vulnerable truth. So if your marriage looks okay on the surface, but feels disconnected and distant on the inside, don't wait for this big breakthrough moment. Start small. You can say, I miss you, or I love when we feel close. That's where this begins. It's small. And if you're in this pattern and you no longer want to feel like you're stuck in this disconnected relationship that's supposed to be a partnership, I created something just for you. It's called Three Simple Shifts to Reignite Connection in Your Marriage. And you'll find the link in the description. It walks you through exactly what to say and do to start changing this dynamic. And if you're longing for personalized support, you can reach out to me in the link in the description as well. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video.